Alright, before we start, I know my voice sounds kinda robotic, and yeah, in a world full of AI, I get why that's suspicious. But I promise, I'm real. Anyway, today I'm gonna try beating this Roblox obby while reading some absolutely unhinged Reddit stories. Let's start with story 1. My husband had a whole second family 2 streets away. I found out because of a school newsletter. I want to start by saying that I am not a paranoid person. I have never gone through a partner's phone. I have never shown up unannounced to check on someone. I have never been the kind of woman who reads into things or manufactures drama. My mother raised me to mind my business, extend grace, and assume the best. I want you to understand that about me before I tell you what happened. Marcus and I had been married for 11 years when I found the newsletter. It was a Tuesday in October. I'd been sorting through the mail pile on the kitchen counter, the kind of pile that accumulates when two working adults have kids in elementary school and a mortgage and aging parents and simply not enough hours. Bills, catalogs, a reminder from the dentist, a birthday card from my aunt in Phoenix, and then a folded newsletter from Plover Ridge Elementary School. This was strange because our children attended Westbrook Academy, which was on the other side of town. I almost threw it away. I genuinely, sincerely almost tossed it directly into the recycling without opening it, but something made me unfold it. Curiosity, maybe, or fate, or whatever you want to call the thing that makes you reach for something you weren't meant to see. The newsletter was addressed to a family. The Delaney Hardrove household. Marcus Delaney was my husband's name. Hardrove was not my name. The newsletter was one of those cheerful school publications full of announcements about the fall festival and reading challenges and a reminder that the book fair was coming. Normal, mundane, completely ordinary school correspondence. Except it was addressed to a family that should not have existed. I sat down at the kitchen counter and I stayed there for a long time. My husband's name is Marcus Delaney. We got married in September of 2013. I did not take his name, but our children, our two daughters, have his last name. The newsletter listed two children at Clover Ridge Elementary. A boy named Owen, age 8, a girl named Petra, age 6. Owen would have been conceived approximately 2 years into our marriage. I did not move from that chair for 40 minutes. When Marcus came home that evening, I was still sitting at the kitchen counter. The newsletter was in front of me on the granite surface. He came through the garage door talking about traffic on the highway, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door the way he always did, asking if I'd thought about dinner. He stopped talking when he saw my face. He didn't look at the newsletter at first, he looked at me, and in that moment I watched something shift behind his eyes. Not confusion, not the face of a man who is trying to understand why his wife looks devastated. It was the face of a man who has been waiting for a particular phone call and it has finally come. He knew. He sat down across from me. He did not offer a single denial. He did not say the words that people always say in movies, the "it's not what you think" or "there must be some mistake." He just sat there with his hands flat on the counter and he said, "How long have you known?" I said, "About 40 minutes." He nodded like this was reasonable, like this was information he was simply cataloging. Her name was Renata. He had met her at a conference in Atlanta in 2015. They had dated, if you could call it that, for about 8 months before she became pregnant. He had not ended things. He had instead quietly arranged his life so that her two existences did not collide. Things. He had instead quietly arranged his life so that our two existences did not collide. Clover Ridge Elementary was on the opposite side of town from Westbrook. They lived on Hemlock Drive. We lived on Sycamore Court, two residential streets that would never intersect unless you were deliberately moving between them. He had been doing this for 8 years. Owen was 8 years old. Petra was 6. My daughters were 9 and 7. He had been raising 4 children simultaneously and none of them knew about the others. I asked him how. I don't mean emotionally, I mean logistically. How did you do this for 8 years without me noticing? He said. And I wanted to understand that he said this calmly, the way a person explains a scheduling system, that it had required a second phone, a post office box for Renata's correspondence, a separate savings account, and very careful calendar management. He had color coded his calendar. I left with my daughters the following morning. I went to my sister's house and I sat on her couch for 3 days. The divorce took 14 months. What I found out during those 14 months through my lawyer and through conversations I should not have had but could not stop myself from having was this. Renata had known about me from the beginning. She had made a decision, she said, to accept the situation because she loved him and believed he would eventually choose her. She had been waiting for 8 years to be chosen. Neither of us was chosen. He had simply been maintaining two lives with the same level of emotional investment, the same birthday remembrances, the same anniversary dinners, the same promises about the future. His future had been structurally a circle. My daughters and his other children have never met. I have thought about what to do about this. The children are half siblings. They did not choose this situation. Owen and Petra are innocent. My daughters are innocent. I don't know what the right answer is. My therapist says I don't have to figure it out right now. She says I can sit with not knowing for a while. I'm sitting with it. The school newsletter is still in a drawer in my sister's kitchen. I have not thrown it away and I don't know why. Maybe because it is the evidence, the only physical proof that my entire marriage was a color coded calendar event. A color coded calendar. That is somehow the most chilling detail I have ever heard. The administrative effort required to maintain this for 8 years is genuinely staggering. I really hope you and your daughters are doing okay. Story 2. My boyfriend of 2 years just admitted he has been speaking to me in a fake accent our entire relationship. His real voice is completely different. I don't even know how to begin explaining this, so I'm just going to say it plainly and let everyone react however they need to react. My boyfriend James has a British accent, had a British accent, has had a British accent for the entirety of the 2 years I have known him. He is from Bristol, he told me, which he described as a port city in the southwest of England. He had stories about growing up there, his childhood home, his secondary school, the particular smell of the harbour on cold mornings. He mentioned things like watching football at his uncle's flat and taking the coach to London for a weekend trip when he was 16. I found all of this interesting because I had never dated anyone from another country and because his accent was genuinely lovely, warm, and specific. Not the generic British accent you hear in American media, but something that felt regional and real. His accent was not real. James is from Akron, Ohio. I found this out not through any dramatic confrontation or discovered evidence, but because of a phone call I was not supposed to hear. 3 weeks ago, I came home from work earlier than expected. James works from home and was on a call in the spare bedroom, which he uses as an office. The door was not fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen. I was walking past to put something in the bathroom and I heard his voice. Except it wasn't his voice. The voice coming from behind the door was American, Midwestern, flat walls and the particular cadence of someone who grew up in the Great Lakes region. The voice was talking about a project deadline and asking about a file and laughing at something the person on the other end had said. I stood in the hallway for probably 90 seconds. Then I went to the kitchen and sat down and waited for him to finish his call. When he came out, he was himself again. The accent was back. He said hello and asked how my day was, and his voice was the voice I had been listening to for 2 years. I said, "Who were you just talking to?" He said, "A colleague." "Why?" I said, "Your voice sounded different." There was a pause that was about 3 seconds too long. He said he had a headache and sometimes that affected his voice. I said, "James, I heard you. Your accent was completely different." He sat down. What followed was a conversation that I have replayed approximately 400 times since it happened. The short version is this. James grew up in Akron. He is 33 years old and he is entirely American and he has never lived in Bristol or anywhere in England. He spent 6 months in the UK for a study abroad program when he was 20 and became, in his words, fascinated with how the accent changed how people treated him. He had experimented with it when he returned and found that it opened conversations, that people were engaged and curious, and that it had become a habit that solidified into something he didn't know how to undo. He has been performing a British identity for, by his estimate, about 9 years. He maintained it with me because he had maintained it with everyone he met in the city where we live, and he did not know how to have a conversation where he explained that he was not who he appeared to be, he said. And I want you to hear this clearly, that he had genuinely intended to tell me early in our relationship, and then the right moment had not come, and then 6 months had passed, and then a year, and then telling me felt like something that might end things, and he cared about me too much to risk it. I said, "What is your real voice?" He spoke to me in his real voice for the first time. It was strange. Not bad, just entirely unfamiliar. The voice of a person I had never met speaking to me from the face of a person I thought I knew. I asked him to tell me something about his real childhood. He talked for about 20 minutes. Akron, a house near a creek, a younger sister named Bethany, a dog named Pepper who had lived to be 14, completely ordinary and completely real and completely unknown to me. I am not broken up with him. I know that is probably what most people expect to hear. I don't know what I am. I am still in the same apartment, sleeping in the same bed, having dinners where he speaks to me in a voice that still sounds like a stranger. He is going to therapy. He has been doing the accent for so long that his therapist has apparently said that unpacking why requires significant work. I keep thinking about all the things I know about Bristol that I learned from a man who has never lived there. I know the harbor smells cold in winter, except I don't, because he's never smelled it either. I am sorry, but I had to take a second. 9 years. He maintained a fake accent for 9 years, and the moment where she hears his real voice for the first time through a doorway, that is so strange and so sad. I don't even know what I would do. Let's keep moving. Story 3. Something has been leaving food on my grandmother's grave for 30 years. Last month it started leaving notes. My grandmother died in 1991. She was buried at St. Catherine's Cemetery on the edge of our town, a small Catholic graveyard with iron gates and old oak trees that shed leaves the color of rust every October. The headstone is modest. Her name, her dates, and the phrase she had specifically requested. She fed everyone she loved. She had been a cook her entire life, not a professional one. She just believed, deeply and without irony, that feeding people was the primary language of love. Her kitchen was always running. There was always something on the stove. She fed neighbors and strangers and the priest and the mail carrier, and once, famously, a man who had knocked on her door asking for directions and left 2 hours later with a full meal and a container of leftover soup. She died of a heart attack at 72. We buried her on a cold Thursday in November, and we grieved her the way you grieve someone who had always felt permanent. My mother started noticing it the following spring. She had gone to visit the grave in April, a few months after the burial, and found a small arrangement of food items on the headstone. Not flowers, food. A bread roll carefully wrapped in cloth. A small jar of what turned out to be pickled beets. A piece of hard candy. My mother assumed it was a neighbor. Some act of memorial kindness from someone who had known my grandmother. She mentioned it to my aunt, who shrugged and said that sounded exactly like something someone who knew grandma would do. But it kept happening. Every few weeks, sometimes monthly. Seasonal things appeared. In summer, there would be fresh tomatoes or peaches wrapped in paper. In winter, there would be preserved things, jars of jam, dried fruit, a small loaf of dense bread, always wrapped, Always carefully arranged, never rotting when my mother found them, which meant they were being replaced, which meant someone was monitoring the grave regularly and knew when the previous offering had been removed. This continued for 30 years. My mother passed away in 2019. I took over visiting the grave because someone needed to. I'm the only one left in town. My aunt moved to Florida in 2004, and my cousins are scattered, and the food kept coming. I started paying closer attention than my mother had. I documented what I found and when. I mounted a small weather camera on a nearby oak tree angled toward the grave, a wildlife camera meant for tracking deer but adequate for my purposes. The camera captured nothing useful for several months. It was triggered by wind and squirrels and once by a fox. But in March of last year, it captured a figure, a woman, old, moving slowly with a cane. She wore a dark coat and a scarf over her head despite the mild temperature. She approached the grave with a cloth bundle under her arm. She unwrapped the bundle on the headstone and arranged the contents carefully. Then she stood there for a very long time. She was talking. I could not hear her. The camera has no audio, but she was clearly speaking. Her lips moved for several minutes. Then she crossed herself, pressed her hand briefly against the headstone, and walked away. I went back the next week with a notebook and I wrote down everything. The following week, the food was there as usual, bread and a small jar of something amber colored. And beside it, for the first time in 30 years, a folded piece of paper held down by a smooth stone. I should not have opened it. This was someone's private communication with a dead woman. But I had spent 30 years wondering, and I was no longer able to apply patience to the situation. The note was written in a shaking hand, Eastern European script that I didn't recognize. But at the bottom, in careful English, as though this part had been composed for a different reader, it said, I know someday someone will find these. I want them to know that your grandmother saved my life in the winter of 1962. I was in a strange country with no money and no English, and she gave me soup. I have been feeding her back for as long as I can. I am very old now. When I stop coming, it will mean I am gone. Please do not be afraid of me. I was only trying to repay a kindness. I sat beside my grandmother's grave for a long time after reading that. I put the note back. I put the stone back on top of it. I went home and I thought about my grandmother, who had once fed a man who knocked on her door for directions and sent him away with soup. I don't know who the woman is. I don't know how to find her. I checked the camera footage for the most recent visit and she moves with the precision of someone who is very frail. I started leaving food on the grave too. Bread and jam and whatever felt right. If she comes and sees it, I want her to know that someone received her story. That 30 years of cold mornings and offerings and a shaking hand writing a note in two languages was not invisible. I don't know if she's still coming, but I'll keep leaving things just in case. I was not prepared for that at all. That ending absolutely got me. She fed everyone she loved, and someone has been trying to feed her back for 30 years. I need a moment. Okay, moving on. Story 4. My twin sister has believed she is an extraordinary baker for 20 years because her family never told her the truth. I finally said something at our cousin's wedding. This is going to sound pettier than it is, or maybe it sounds exactly as petty as it is. I honestly can't tell anymore. My twin sister Claudia and I are 34 years old. We are fraternal twins who look enough alike that people sometimes ask, but different enough that we've never been confused for each other in any meaningful way. We grew up close. We are still close, mostly. But there is one thing between us that has been a slow building source of tension for about 3 years, and it finally exploded at our cousin Bria's wedding last month. Here is the thing. Claudia is under the impression that she is an extraordinary baker. She is not. She is fine. She is a competent, adequate, thoroughly mediocre baker who produces results that are reliably edible and occasionally quite good. She is not by any measure remarkable. The problem is that everyone in our family has been telling her she is remarkable for 20 years. It started when we were teenagers. Claudia took an interest in baking after her mother bought her a cookbook for Christmas. She practiced, she improved. She started bringing things to family gatherings, and our aunts and uncles would exclaim over them in the way that families exclaim over things produced by someone they love. Claudia absorbed this feedback as objective truth. By the time we were in our 20s, she had constructed an identity around being the baker in the family. She entered a local competition once and came in fourth out of six, but she framed this as nearly winning, and we all nodded. She started a small social media account for her baking and accumulated about 340 followers over 4 years, which she refers to as her following. I want to be clear, none of this would matter to me if it stopped there. But 3 years ago, Claudia quit her job as an office administrator to pursue baking professionally. She invested a significant amount of money, including a portion of her late mother's inheritance, into launching a custom cake business. She named it after herself. She built a website, she bought equipment. The business has not done well. It has not done well because Claudia's pricing does not match her product. Because professional custom cake baking is an extraordinarily competitive market, and because the family feedback loop she had been operating in for 20 years had not prepared her for the response of the general public, which was polite indifference. She has made over 3 years approximately $11,000 from the business. She invested more than 40,000. I have watched this quietly because Claudia is my sister and she is an adult and it is her life and her money. I have not commented on the business decisions. I have not suggested she reconsider. I have smiled at family gatherings when her relatives exclaimed over her cakes, as they always have. Until Bria's wedding, Bria had hired a professional pastry chef to make the wedding cake. It was a 5-tier creation, almond and lavender, and it was extraordinary. Everyone said so, and Claudia spent the reception making comments. Not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. Little asides about how the fondant work was slightly thick, how the flavor balance was interesting, how she might have done things differently. She was doing the thing that people do when they are threatened by excellence, which is to narrate small imagined flaws until they feel better. At one point, she said to me directly, "Honestly, mine would have been better. You know that, right?" And I said, "Claudia, I love you, but no. I don't know that. I don't think that's true." The table went quiet. Claudia looked at me like I had slapped her. What followed was a conversation I am not going to detail entirely, but the summary is that I said gently and then less gently that the feedback she had received from our family over the years was loving but not accurate, that the professional market had been telling her something important for 3 years, and that I was worried about her. She left the reception. She has not spoken to me since. My aunt says I should apologize. My cousin Bria has texted me to say she is not upset with me but that the timing was not ideal, which is fair. My husband says I should have stayed quiet. He says sometimes the kindest thing is to let people have their stories. But here is what I keep thinking. Claudia has spent $40,000 in 3 years and a portion of her mother's inheritance on a story that none of us were willing to correct. And I don't know, at some point, whether the kind thing and the quiet thing are actually the same thing. Am I the problem here? This is genuinely hard. The $40,000 from the mother's inheritance is where it stops being just a quirky family dynamic and becomes something more serious. You're not wrong, the wedding timing is a valid criticism. But you're not wrong. Moving on. Story 5. I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour pharmacy for 6 years. One customer came in every single night, bought the same thing, and was never once captured on our security cameras. I took the overnight shift at Meridian Pharmacy because it paid an extra $2 an hour. And I was 23, and $2 an hour felt significant. Overnight at a pharmacy is mostly quiet. There are the usual 3 a.m. customers, the insomniacs, the people with sick children who have run out of fever reducer, the occasional person who simply cannot sleep and wants to browse the vitamin aisle in peace. It is a job that requires presence more than effort, and I was good at it. The pharmacy was in a strip mall on the edge of a mid sized city, next to a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop that closed at 9. Our parking lot was well lit, and our security system was new, and our cameras covered every angle of the store floor. The entrance, the parking lot, and the pharmacy counter specifically, because the pharmacy counter had controlled substances behind it, and the company was serious about documentation. The man started coming in about 4 months after I began the overnight shift. He came in at 2:17 every morning. I know this because it was consistent enough that I eventually started noting it. Not because I was suspicious of him, but because there is something comforting about regularity during a long quiet shift, and he was the most regular customer I had ever encountered. He was older, 60s, maybe early 70s, well dressed in the particular way of men from an earlier era, trousers with a crease, a collared shirt, a jacket even in summer. He wore wire-rimmed glasses. He had the kind of silver hair that sits very still, as though it has made peace with its situation. He always bought the same thing, a bottle of orange juice from the refrigerated case, the small single serving size, and a pack of antacids. He would carry these two items to my register, place them carefully on the belt, and pay in cash. Always exact change. He would nod at me, take his bag, and leave. He never spoke. Not once in 6 years. He would nod when I told him his total. He would nod when I handed him his bag. He would nod at the door, as though acknowledging the building itself. I found him comfortable. There is a particular ease that comes with predictable people, and he was the most predictable person I had ever served. I didn't notice the camera issue for almost a year. What happened was that there was an incident unrelated to the man, a shoplifting situation involving the energy drink section around 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. The assistant manager pulled security footage the next morning and called me to ask if I remembered seeing anything unusual that night. I was watching the footage with her and we were moving through the timestamps, and I said casually that the regular 2 a.m. man hadn't come in yet in the footage we were watching. My assistant manager Sandra looked at me. She said, "What regular 2 a.m. man?" I described him. The older gentleman, wire rimmed glasses, bought orange juice and antacids. Sandra looked at the footage. We went back together through a week's worth of overnight recordings. The cameras captured the parking lot, the entrance, the interior, everything. He was not in any of the footage. I don't mean the footage was glitchy or there were gaps. I mean that on the nights I clearly remembered him being there, clearly remembered him placing his items on the belt and handing me exact change and nodding at the door. The cameras showed the register area with me standing in it and nobody approaching. Sandra thought I was confused. She said night shifts did things to perception, and maybe I was combining memories of different customers into one person. I went home and thought about it. I started keeping a log. Every time he came in, I wrote it down: day, time, items purchased, exact change denominations. I saved my register receipts from those transactions because the register recorded every sale. The register receipts were there. The sales were documented: orange juice, antacids, cash payment, correct change. He was purchasing things. The register recorded the purchases. The camera showed nothing. I told myself there was a technical explanation, a blind spot in the camera angle I hadn't identified, some issue with the recording that was consistent. I looked for the blind spot. I could not find one. He kept coming in. 2:17 every morning. 6 years. Orange juice and antacids. Exact change. A nod at the door. On my last night before I transferred to a different location, he came in as usual, placed his items on the belt. I rang them up. He handed me the exact change as always. And then, for the first and only time he spoke, he said, very quietly, "You're leaving." It was not a question. I said yes, I was transferring. He nodded in the way he always nodded. Then he picked up his bag. Then he said, without looking at me, "I've been shopping here since 1987. The pharmacy had been built in 2003. He nodded at the door and left. I have been at my new location for 3 years now. I've never told anyone this story who believed me. But I kept one of the register receipts. It's in a drawer in my apartment. Orange juice, small, antacids, regular strength. Cash payment $4.37 exact. I don't know what to do with it. The 1987 detail at the end. I need to go lie down. I work overnight retail and I am now reconsidering every single regular customer I have ever had. Alright, moving on. Story 6. The small town I grew up in has a festival every 10 years. I moved away at 18 and just went back for the first time. Something is very wrong with how everyone is aging. I grew up in Marin, population roughly 2,400, in a valley between two ranges of low mountains that the locals have always called the Sisters. Marin is the kind of town that people from outside of it find charming and people who grew up in it find quietly suffocating. There is one main street with a hardware store and a diner and a pharmacy and a small library with enthusiastic librarians. There is a church that predates the town itself, built by the original settlers, which has always seemed improbable. Every 10 years, Marin holds a festival called the Gathering. It is not a common tourist event. It is not listed on travel sites. It is internal for residents and people who were born there, and it has been happening since the town was founded. I left Marin at 18 for college and did not go back. My parents moved away when I was 22. I had no remaining ties to the town. I spent 20 years not thinking about Marin except as the answer to where are you from at parties. My old friend Cecily tracked me down through social media last year. We had been close as children, inseparable from ages 8 through 14, and then I had moved to a different school district and we had drifted. She found me, sent a message, and we had one of those long catch up conversations that happens occasionally with childhood friends, warm and slightly strange and full of gaps. Cecily still lives in Marin. She said she had never been able to leave, which she said lightly but which sat oddly with me. She told me the gathering was this year. She said I should come. She said specifically that people who were born in Marin should come to the gathering if they can, that it matters. I went because I was curious and because Cecily had asked, and because at 38 I have the kind of relationship with nostalgia where I thought one weekend of revisiting a place from childhood might be interesting. I drove into Marin on a Friday afternoon. The town looked the same. This was my first clue that something was wrong, though I didn't identify it as such until later. Towns change. Even small ones. Buildings get renovated or torn down. New businesses replace old ones. Signage updates. Marin looked precisely, exactly as I remembered it from 20 years ago. The diner had the same sign. The hardware store had the same faded awning. The pharmacy window had the same display arrangement I remembered from childhood. Cecily met me on the main street. And here is where I should have asked more questions. Cecily is 38. I know this because we are the same age. We were born 4 months apart and grew up in the same grade. She looks 22, not preserved in the way of someone who has good genetics and takes care of themselves. Young, genuinely young in a way that I cannot explain without sounding like I'm being dramatic. Her face has no lines. Her hair is the same bright color it was in 8th grade. She moves with the energy of someone who is not almost 40. I thought I was simply remembering her wrong. I thought maybe I had aged more than her. Then I saw other people. The town is full of people I recognized. People who were adults when I was a child and who should now be in their 60s and 70s. They look like they did when I was young. The woman who ran the library looks 50. She was 50 when I was 8. My 4th grade teacher is in the diner. She looks 45. She was 45 when I was 9. I saw a man who had been elderly, visibly elderly, white haired and slow moving when I was a child. He is walking down the main street and he looks 70. He was at least 80 when I last saw him 30 years ago. I am the oldest looking person in this town and I am 38. I went to the gathering Friday night. It was in the field behind the church. There was food and music and the whole town was there. Cecily introduced me to people, and everyone was warm and glad I had come, and normal and pleasant. At the end of the night, Cecily walked me back to the house where I was staying, one of the town's three rental properties, and she said something that I have been thinking about since. She said, I'm glad you came back before it closed. She said, after the gathering, the town goes quiet for another 10 years. It's harder to visit when it's quiet. You would have had to wait. I said, Cecily, what is happening to the people here? Why doesn't anyone look their age? She said, we're taken care of. I said, by what? She looked at the old church, older than the town. She said, you should have stayed when you were 18. It would have been easier. I am writing this from the rental house. It is Saturday morning. The gathering continues tonight. I am going to leave today. I don't think I'm going to tell Cecily I'm leaving early. I think I'm just going to get in my car and drive toward the valley exit while it's daylight. I don't know what is happening in Marin. I don't know what it means to be taken care of or what it means that the town closes. I know that I don't look the way Cecily looks, and I left when I was 18, and I think those two things are connected. I'm leaving now, the church being older than the town. I cannot stop thinking about that detail. Please, if you're out there reading this, we need an update. Please be okay. Alright, moving on. Story 7. I've been dating my neighbor for 8 months. I just found out she has been leaving fate notes from the HOA in my mailbox to control my behavior. I want to say upfront that I own my home and I am 41 years old and I feel absolutely ridiculous writing this. But here we are. My neighbor Priya and I have been in a relationship since last February. We live in a small townhouse community, 8 units, very little turnover, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and borrows each other's parking spots and trades excess zucchini from their gardens. We got together when she knocked on my door to return a package that had been misdelivered to her. We ended up talking for 2 hours on my front steps. She is genuinely one of the most interesting people I have encountered. She is a marine biologist. She has done fieldwork in 4 countries. She has strong opinions about basically everything, and she made me laugh so hard on our first date that I pulled a muscle. I am giving you all of this because I need you to understand that I have been fully invested in this relationship. I found 8 letters in my filing cabinet last month. I found them because I was looking for my vehicle registration and I have a slight organizational problem and I keep things in the wrong places. The letters were on official looking HOA stationery. Harborview Commons Homeowners Association, complete with a logo and a formal letterhead and a return address I recognized as the community management company's address. The letters contain notices about various issues with my property. Letter 1, dated May of last year, informed me that several residents had commented on the noise levels from my weekend morning music and requested I limit outdoor audio after 8 pm. Letter 2, dated June, noted that my habit of leaving my car running in the driveway for extended warm-up periods in cold weather had generated complaints. Letter 3, dated July, mentioned that my outdoor motion sensor light was angled in a way that was disturbing neighbors and asked me to adjust it. I remembered each of these letters. I had received them over the past 10 months and had taken each one seriously because I am a considerate neighbor and when the HOA tells me something is causing a problem, I address it. I turned my music down, I stopped the extended warm up, I adjusted the light. The problem is that we do not have an HOA. Harborview Commons does not have a homeowners association. We have a property management company that handles maintenance requests, but there is no HOA. There has never been an HOA. And the management company confirmed when I called them that they had not sent any of the letters in my file. I googled the letterhead logo. It is a free vector graphic available on a stock website. The return address on the letters is the property management company's address. which is public record. All 8 letters addressed issues related to noise, light, or outdoor activity specifically on the side of my home that faces Priya's unit. Priya has a home office. She works from home. The side of my home that faces her unit is adjacent to her office window. She wrote the letters. I don't have proof of this in a legal sense, but I have no other logical explanation, and I have spent 3 weeks looking for one. I haven't said anything to her yet. Part of me is waiting to understand why before I confront anything. Was it just a desire for quiet? Was there something more controlling underneath the extremely warm and funny person I have been dating for 8 months? Is this a one time thing or a pattern? I looked up our texts from the relevant periods. After the May letter about music, Priya texted me the following Saturday morning to say how peaceful the weekend felt and that she had gotten so much work done. I had responded that I was glad, had mentioned I was being more mindful about noise. She had texted a heart emoji. I have a marine biologist girlfriend who has seen 4 countries and makes me laugh so hard it hurts, and who apparently writes fake HOA letters to quietly manage my behavior. I'm holding all of this information simultaneously and I don't know what to do with it. Has anyone dealt with anything like this? The heart emoji after the noise letter. She is operating on a completely different plane. The marine biologist details somehow makes it funnier and also more alarming. Moving on. Story 8. I found a voicemail on my phone from a number that doesn't exist. The voice on it is someone I buried 11 years ago. I need to preface this by saying that I'm a practical person. I'm an accountant. I have a spreadsheet for my grocery lists. I do not entertain supernatural explanations for things that have ordinary ones, and I spent a long time looking for an ordinary one here before deciding to write this down. My younger brother Daniel died in a car accident 11 years ago. He was 24, a drunk driver, a Tuesday night, an intersection he had driven through hundreds of times. I was 31 when he died. I am 42 now. I have grieved him the way people grieve, in stages and waves, with good years and harder years, and I have arrived at the functional equilibrium that people mean when they say they've learned to live with it. I do not hear from Daniel. I want to be clear about that because of what I'm about to tell you. I have not been experiencing grief hallucinations or complicated mourning. I have not been in a difficult period lately. My life is stable. I am fine. 3 weeks ago, I got a voicemail. I almost didn't listen to it. I get a lot of spam calls and I've developed the habit of checking the number before engaging. The number was not in my contacts. The area code was local. The number was otherwise unfamiliar. I was going to delete it. I listened to it instead because I was waiting for a call back from a client and thought it might be a different number than the one I had on file. There was silence for the first few seconds. Then, hey, it's me. I don't have a lot of time. Are you still in the house on Clement Street? I drove past it, but I couldn't really stop. I need you to know that I'm okay. I know that probably sounds crazy. I just need you to know that I'm okay and that it didn't hurt. It happened really fast and it didn't hurt, and I'm okay. Tell mom, okay? Tell mom it didn't hurt. And then it stopped. I have listened to the voicemail 47 times. I have had 2 friends listen to it without telling them who they were about to hear. Both of them said they didn't recognize the voice, but I recognized it. It was Daniel. I should tell you that I understand all the rational explanations. Voice resemblance, targeted fraud using compiled audio samples, a wrong number from someone who happened to sound like my brother in a message that happened to contain relevant details. I have run through all of these. Clement Street is where I grew up. Where Daniel grew up, it is not my current address. It is our childhood home, which I have not lived in since I was 22, which belongs to a retired couple now, and which is not associated with my name in any searchable way that I am aware of. I called the number back 4 times. Each time it rang 8 times and cut to a voicemail box that was full and not accepting messages. I had the number traced through a service I paid for. The number was registered to a prepaid carrier and had been activated 11 days before the voicemail was left and was deactivated the day after. I have not told my mother. I have been trying to decide whether to tell her for 3 weeks. The message said to tell her it didn't hurt. I think about that a lot. I'm an accountant. I believe in what can be documented. I have the voicemail saved in 3 separate locations because I am afraid of losing it, and I don't entirely understand why. It didn't hurt, it happened really fast, and it didn't hurt, and he's okay. I don't know what to do with that. Please save that voicemail. Whatever it is or isn't, save it. I'm so sorry about your brother. I genuinely don't know what to make of that story.